Alrighty, welcome back to Wordy Wednesdays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth. And if you're wondering why this week I wasn't doing Enshittification, why everything suddenly got worse and what to do about it by Cory Doctorow, that's because it's doing numbers. Um, and he's made rather a big deal about having an audiobook that is independently produced and published. So I am going to avoid that one as much as I would have liked to have read it blind on stream. I think it would be impolite. Admittedly, it was impolite of me to do the same for what is it? Absolution. Absolution. Is it Absolution? Yes, Absolution. The fourth book of the Area X series, but I couldn't resist. This literally also just came out, which is why I was as excited to do it. I read like the first couple pages and was like, oh, I gotta do this on stream. And then I'm like, oh, I should probably check if there's an audiobook. And it's like, oh, yeah, there is one. I can put a link if people want it in the Discord, but I won't do it here because we're reading a different book entirely this week. One that is more seasonally appropriate. Anyway, so this is a book. Um, it my edition is the one that I have a cover image posted of right now. Is of a collected edition of two books. The book we'll be starting today is To Walk the Night. And it is kind of it is nominally a science fiction cosmic horror tale. There aren't a mountain of elements of either of those things there, but they are present, and they are somewhat central to the ultimate finale, as well as some mysterious stuff that happens in between, in the middle, and betwixt. There is indeed an introduction written by Stephen King. I am not going to read it because it has spoilers. Let's see. He. So an interesting thing about this author is he really doesn't have many many books to his name that he wrote. He does have a couple, but a lot of his work is plays. You've got Back Home from 31, Runner in the Snow in 31, Crystal Clear in 32, The Silence of God. He does have a few more books than just these two, but these are two that really got him noticed, and then he spent the latter portion of his life as an editor, I believe, and publisher. Let's see here. I can even read in the book. It's got its own author credit here. So the edition I'm reading from is the Rim of Morning edition. There is an older published Rim of Morning that I have a cover for that I found. But the one I'm reading was done in... When was this one published? So the original version of this collection was done in 64. Let's see. Where are you? I know it's relatively recent. Where are you? My gut is saying that what I'm holding was first published in like '08. My version was 2015. There we go. Found it. We get there eventually, folks. I apologize. So what they have written about William Sloane is the following. William Sloane, born in 1906, died in 1974, was born in Plymouth, Massachusetts. After graduating from Princeton University in 1929, he enjoyed modest success writing supernatural and fantasy dramas. By the end of the 1930s, he had published his only two novels, To Walk the Night in 37 and The Edge of Running Water in 39. During the 1950s, he edited two science fiction anthologies, Space, 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 stories about the time when men will be adventuring to the stars in 1953, and Stories for Tomorrow in 1954. Sloane taught at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference for more than 25 years and was responsible for inviting many notable writers, including John Williams and John Ciardi, to join the faculty. In 1983, a collection of his Breadloaf lectures was published as The Craft of Writing. For much of his career, Sloane held numerous editorial positions, including a stint at his own publishing house, and from 1955 until his death, he was the managing director of Rutgers University Press. It also has an author bio of Stephen King, because his name was used to promote this edition, but we're going to disregard that for now, because he's just some rando nobody's ever heard of. Certainly has never had multiple movies made about his works or anything like that. Oh, wow, that is still way too hot. I'm not drinking that. So I do have to, and I have it written in the stream description, I do have to go in and say this was written in the 30s. It has certain views on certain social issues that are, by modern standards, fairly reprehensible or problematic. I think the story, well, okay. In this first one, in To Walk the Night, it is pretty difficult to get around. It's fairly central to the entire plot, but in the second one, which we'll see how long it takes us to get through To Walk the Night, and then I would like to do The Edge of Running Water, because for my money it might actually be the stronger of the two. I do like To Walk the Night, but I think The Edge of Running Water is a little better in some ways. So the way most of this is written is kind of in a, I guess you'd call it in media res. Media? Yeah, whatever. Basically starts kind of towards the end of things. It's not in media res, but it starts largely towards the end of matters. And we've got a character, what's his name? Barkley. And he is on his way to have a chat with a family friend, a father figure of sorts. In fact, the father of his best friend. And he basically recounts how he got to where he is in this discussion with this father figure, this Dr. Lister, I think. Is it Dr. Lister? Yes, Dr. Lister. And much of the book will be told basically as a flashback. It will occasionally zip forward to being in present tense. I will try to make note of when that is, when it isn't obvious. There are one or two points where it'll do it, and there'll actually be a flashback within a flashback. Or actually, it's a flash forward within the flashback, which isn't terribly obvious until you're looking at the text and see what's italicized and what isn't. I will try to make some sort of... I'll try to make it clear when that happens. Alright, let me get an arbitrary stopping point lopped off here real quick. That's probably good right there. Let me plop in a bookmark affair here, and we will get rolling with the whatever we roll with. Ball bearings. Greased lightning. Something that rolls. Alright. Okay, give me 1 sec here and we'll get moving with the grooving. To Walk the Night by William Sloane. And mind alone is never whole, but needs the body for a soul. Struthers Burt, Pack Trip, Suite. Foreword. The form in which this narrative is cast must necessarily be an arbitrary one. In the main, it follows the story pieced together by Dr. Lister and myself as we sat on the terrace of his Long Island house one night in the summer of 1936. But in retelling it, I have not tried to follow exactly the wording of our conversation. To do so would leave many things obscure to readers who did not know Selina, Jerry, and the rest of us. Therefore, I have allowed myself the liberties of adding certain descriptions of people and places, and of attempting to suggest now and again the atmosphere of strangeness, even of terror, which was so much a part of my life while these events were in progress. My belief is that this story is unlikely to attract much attention. Essentially, it is concerned with people whose very names, with one exception, are unknown to the general public. One of them is now dead, and another is alive merely in the physical sense of the word. The evidence which I can bring forward in support of its truth is almost wholly indirect, and psychological rather than circumstantial. With some hesitation, I submitted galley proofs of this book to Alan Parsons, who worked on the Lenormand case from its beginning. The letter he sent in reply is confidential, and I am not free to print it here. Thanks, however, to valuable suggestions from him, the presentation of the facts has been revised in several places, and where my narrative touches upon the evidence in the official records, it is at least accurate. Its interpretation, of course, is entirely Dr. Lister's and mine. What Parsons may have thought of it, I cannot tell for certain. But some weeks ago, in making a final check of the transcripts of parts of the evidence, I went to his office at New Zion. When his secretary brought me the case folders, I observed that she took them out of a file drawer labeled "Closed." I am not sure that it is wise to make this story a matter of public record. Dr. Lister and I have hesitated before doing so. Our ultimate decision is based upon the belief that it is never expedient to suppress the truth. We do not expect it to secure immediate acceptance. There are some experiences which are alien to everyday life. They are doomed for a certain term to walk the night, before the mind of man either recognizes them for what they are, or dismisses their appearance as fantasy. Barclay M. Jones, Long Island, 1937. Chapter 1. End of Evening. The driveway began to dip to the long pitch of the bluff. The old taxi lumbered around curves and dropped heavily down the slope, its tires making a strong, harsh noise as they rolled over the gravel. The sound told me, without my having to open my eyes, how close we were to the house. Only a minute more to lie back in the refuge of this dilapidated sedan and be carried along without effort and without thought. Then the narcotic of traveling, of surrendering myself to the mere forward motion of train and automobile, would wear off. For 2,500 miles in 3 days, I had tried to imagine what I would do when the wheels under me stopped rolling and I should have to rouse myself to action. The air coming through the open window was already fresher, with a coolness in it from Long Island Sound. Reluctantly, I propped myself upright in a corner of the back seat and looked out. We were within a few hundred yards of the house. There was a glitter of water, darkened to the color of blued steel, shining between the stems of the trees. Fireflies were beginning to show in the laurels on each side of the road, and the birches had taken on a twilight glimmer. Almost there. I wanted to tell the driver to slow down, that I was not ready to have the journey end yet. Instead, I straightened my tie and rubbed some of the dust off my shoes. We swung round the last bend and left the trees behind us. The familiar outline of the house was black against the sudden sweep of the Sound, and there was no light in the windows on the landward side. Even the bulb under the porte-cochere was dark. After all, there was the porte-cochere. Even the bulb under the porte-cochere was dark. After all, there was no reason why it should be lighted to receive me. What I had come to tell Jerry's father did not require light or welcome. Always before, when I had come here, there had been radiance in the windows and eagerness in my own thoughts. The impassive face of the building tonight was actually grateful because it did not remind me so much of those other times. The car ground to a halt in front of the door. Thomas must have been listening on the other side of it. He came out at once. A flood of thin yellow light spilled across the narrow porch, blotched waveringly by his shadow as he came down the 2 alighting steps. The way he walked, with the stiff carefulness of an old man, startled me. I did not remember him like this. His butler's coat, made for him by Dr. Lister's own tailor, did not fit him any more, and the stoop in his carriage was new too. Seeing him come out to meet me made the whole thing more real and less tolerable. My throat thickened, and I did not trust myself to speak for some seconds while I paid off the driver and hauled my bag out of the car. My muscles, I saw, were almost too weary to obey orders, and I heard myself grunt as I tugged at my suitcase. "Hello, Thomas," I said, and my voice sounded harsh and rusty. "Mr. Barclay, sir," he replied, giving my name the English pronunciation. That's in reference to how his name is spelled. It's Berkeley, but it's pronounced Barclay. Barclay. "Mr. Barclay, sir," he replied, giving my name the English pronunciation. Even in the shadows of the porch I could see how still and gray his face was, how carefully he had composed the lines at his mouth and eyes to betray no emotion. His appearance shocked me. The picture of Thomas in my mind was of another man entirely. A younger, straighter man with the laughter in his eyes only partly concealed by a professional decorum. Thomas, the Thomas that I had grown up with, was only incidentally a butler. He was a tall, brown man who could handle a jib sheet like a sailor, and shoot tin cans in the air with a revolver. He was the companion of Jerry's boyhood and mine, the man from whom we had learned how to ride and fish and swim. The Thomas in my mind seemed to have no connection with this tired old man who was carrying my bag with a perceptible effort. I wondered if my own face was as changed as his. Did I look 20 years older? As we crossed the porch, I could not keep from staggering. There was no sensation at all in my legs, and walking was laborious, conscious process. "Steady!" I heard Thomas's low voice behind me. "I'm all right." "Yes, sir, of course." The hall was cool and empty. Most of the rugs had been taken up for summer, and the dark oak floor glowed somberly under the wall lights. To the left, a broad, heavily banistered stair curved up and away into the dark, but on the right the hall continued clear across the house to a pair of big double doors. Beyond them I had a glimpse of the reach of the sound and the color of the sunset. As I always did when I entered it, I thought again what a good house this was, full of comfortably large furniture and a sense of space. Women sometimes said that it was like a club, but we never minded that. We liked its dignity and its impersonality, and the absence of any feminine influence. No woman lived in it, and there was no reason why it should look as if one did. Thomas switched on the stair lights. "We have given you your old room, sir," he said, and began slowly to carry up my bag. "But," I began to object, "doesn't he want to see me right away?" "The doctor is on the terrace, Mr. Barclay. He thought you would prefer to wash and change before—" He left the sentence uncompleted, but I understood what he meant. He had been about to say, "before you go out to tell him about his son's death." I followed Thomas up the stairs, heavily and without any further protest. Under my hand the banister was smooth and solid. Jerry and I slid down it, I remembered, the first night I had ever come here. Nothing was changed except Thomas. The house maintained its air of stability and peace, and even in the stupor of grief and weariness in which I was, I felt again the old sense of belonging to it. We went down the upstairs corridor to the familiar door. Thomas opened it and switched on the lights in the room beyond.
"Home again, sir," he said, and swallowed. He was right. This low, wide room with its windows looking over the water, its dark blue leather easy-chair, its broad walnut bed, the huge old desk in one corner, and its shelves and shelves of books, was my real home, much more so than any of the guest rooms in which I always had to stay when I visited Grace and her husband. Grace is my mother, and she and her second husband, Fred Mallard, have lived for the past 15 years in a succession of smart, theatrically furnished apartments which never contained a real place for me. So, when I used to come home from school, and later college, I simply occupied the guest room, and was treated almost as a guest, too, except for Grace's infrequent attacks of maternal tenderness. After Jerry and I became such fast friends, Dr. Lister practically adopted me as a second son. I spent more time in the house on Long Island than I did with my mother, and she was visibly relieved to have me off her hands. Grace was grateful to Jerry's father for taking an interest in me, and not in a wholly selfish way. She admitted that she and Fred were not the sort of people who ought to have children dependent on them, and she knew that I needed a certain feeling of security and stability that her way of life could never provide. The room to which I now came had been mine ever since the summer after Jerry's and my third-form year at prep school. We had arrived at the house full of excitement and plans for the summer to find that Dr. Lister had done over two upstairs rooms, put a bath between them, and furnished them specially for us. When he showed me mine, he said, "This is your room. You can do anything you like in it, provided you keep it neat. When you aren't here, nobody else will be allowed to use it." I had stammered out some sort of thanks, interrupted by a whoop as Jerry came bursting through the connecting door. "Hey, Bark, isn't this somepin'?" But it was more than somepin' to me. It was something I had always wanted. It was what I had always wanted, a place that was securely my own, and that would remain so no matter how many times Grace moved from apartment to apartment. I had grown up in this room. Thomas began to unpack my bag. That was familiar, too. He had done the same thing 100 times before. Even in the stupor which dulled me, I saw him give the customary glance of inspection to each shirt and pair of socks before putting it away. A habit he'd got into when he first learned what school laundries do to buttons and fabric. The silence between us contained no unspoken question. I knew that he did not expect me to say anything to him, to tell him the things that had happened. Like myself, he was trying not to think. Slowly and heavily, I began to undress. When I glanced at him next, he had stopped taking out my clothes and was holding to the footboard of the bed, looking down into the suitcase and shaking a little. I knew at once what he had come upon and went over and lifted it out myself. It was the silver vase which Jerry and I had found one summer in a Paris antique shop and brought home because we wanted it more than anything else we'd seen abroad. The metal felt cold and heavy in my hand, and the silver curves of the thing reflected the lights and the room in a sliding jumble of distorted images. For a second I hated it. And yet it was a beautiful thing, with a flawless 6-inch replica of the winged Victory on its lid, and the long Greek lines of the vase body flowing into the base. I carried it across the room and set it on the wide window ledge. The goddess strained exultantly forward toward the darkening sound and the wide spaces of the evening sky. Under her feet, in the hollow breast of the vase, was a double handful of white crystalline ashes. Thomas must have guessed that I would choose our silver urn to hold Jerry's ashes. "I'll leave it there until we decide," I said. "Yes, sir." He went on with his unpacking. "Have you had dinner, Mr. Barclay?" "I had something in the station. I'm not hungry." He nodded, snapped the bag shut, and stowed it in the closet. "I'll start the shower, sir. Will you have it hot?" "No," I said. "Lukewarm." "Yes, that's best in hot weather." He disappeared into the bathroom. I finished my undressing, hardly able to focus my attention on what I was doing. When you haven't slept except in snatches for several days, things begin to seem unreal. My memory was flashing disconnected pictures in front of my eyes, and some of them were more real than the four walls of the room. They were pictures that I did not want to look at, but they came to me in steady succession in spite of myself. What would it be like, I wondered, if I tried to go to sleep tonight? How many of these images would I have to look at again and again before they faded into blackness? Even on the edge of exhaustion, as I was, I dreaded the thought of shutting my eyes. The shower felt good. The feel of water running down over my skin was enough physical pleasure to stop me from thinking very much, and it was comfortable to be clean again after 3 days on the train. The rush and patter of the water began to put tag ends of songs into my mind. I'll have a rendezvous with you. No, that was not a good song. There would be no rendezvous again for Jerry and me. Try something else. Soft o'er the fountain, lingering falls the southern moon, far o'er the mountain, far o'er the mountain, far over the looming cliff of Cloud Mesa, with the white adobe house in the shadow by the spring. That was something else I did not want to think about. Songs were no good. I turned off the water and dried myself slowly. The more I hurried, the sooner I'd be talking to Dr. Lister. Thomas had laid out flannels, a soft white shirt, and one of the club blazers Jerry and I wore when we sat on the terrace and drank and looked at the water and the summer night. We used to do that often when there wasn't a dance at the club and we didn't feel like going for a drive. I slipped into the clothes, grateful for their cool cleanness, combed my hair, put pipe, tobacco pouch, and matches into my pocket, and started down the hall. The routine of doing pleasant, familiar things had made the past half hour endurable, but it deserted me partway down the stairs. The worst moment of all was coming now, and I knew it. Jerry's father was waiting for me on the terrace, waiting to hear the story I had to tell him. I had no fear of that. He was equal to anything that could happen to him. I never knew a man who had such mastery over himself as Dr. Lister. Even when I told him that his son had shot himself, there would be no crevice in his armor. And because I was almost as much his own son as Jerry had been, there's a line break there that's throwing me. And because I was almost as much his own son as Jerry had been, it would be easier for both of us. What I was afraid of was something quite different. It was not the telling of the facts about Jerry's death that would be difficult. Somehow I had to give them to him without making him begin to think. I must present my story in such a way as to make it seem natural, and it wasn't natural. The idea of suicide did not belong to Jerry's character, and Dr. Lister would know that as well as I did. The first question he would ask would be, why? As I went down the stairs, I wondered how I was going to answer that question without telling him at least a part of the things that I had come to know and believe. There was danger in that. The things he would want to know could not be stated in terms of tangible facts, of events and people shaped into a recognizable pattern. For the first time, I admitted to myself that there was a possibility of connection between small, disturbing things in the past and the present fact of Jerry's death. What that common denominator was, I did not know, but I was certain that I did not want to find out. Merely admitting its existence gave me a feeling of tightness inside that was familiar. It was, I realized, fear. And fear of a shapeless, misty thought that was as insubstantial as a ghost. But Dr. Lister would not believe in ghosts. I did not myself, for that matter. I must tell my story matter-of-factly, as if that shadow in the corner of my mind did not exist. That was all. I must not make him feel, as I did, that something horrible lay behind what I said. It could be dangerous to let him begin to sort and arrange the elements of the past so that he, too, thought he saw a ghost and began to think back, selecting here a fact and there an overtone, weighing one trifle of evidence against another until he had a complete story. The pieces of the puzzle were all lying in my mind, of so much I was sure. I felt that if I looked at them, thought about them, they would slip together into a picture of the truth, and the feeling of frightened me. My conscious mind rejected the idea of knowing or thinking anything more about the events of the past 2 years. But Dr. Lister would not consent to that, once started. He would want to get down to the bedrock of the truth. Dawn's tremendous lines went through my mind. Whoever comes to shroud me, do not harm, nor question much, that subtle wreath of hair about mine arm, the mystery, the sign you must not touch. When we shrouded Jerry in our talk tonight, we must not question much. He had been unhappy, and his marriage had not turned out to be what he had hoped from it, and he had shot himself. Those were the bald facts. If there was anything behind them, it had best stay in the shadows. I would tell my story carefully, as nearly within the bounds of truth as I could, but suppressing some things. It would not be wise, for example, to say that she had been in the room when Jerry picked the gun out of the drawer, and I was tired, too, my own mind not entirely clear. I should have to be very careful. The double doors at the end of the hall were still open. I stepped out on the terrace. Below the balustrade, the land sloped down in a long sweep of grass to the beach and the waves on the sand. Framing the lawn on either side, the trees were heavy clusters of black shadow against the sky. By now, the lower air was full of the silent sparks of fireflies. There was no wind at all. Almost in the zenith, the great constellation of Orion sprawled across the sky, and as I saw it I remembered another time when I had stood under it, and another smell quite different from that of the flowers blooming under the balustrade. Jerry's father was sitting at the white iron garden table Jerry's father was sitting at the white iron garden table. The white iron garden table. Much better. Jerry's father was sitting at the white iron garden table to my right. In the middle of it was a candle in a hurricane lamp socket. A tall bottle of sherry and 2 glasses. The gleam of the candle picked out the crisp whiteness of his hair and shadowed the sockets of his eyes. I could see no sign of sorrow in his posture. He sat as erect as always, with one arm stretched before him across the tabletop, and the brown fingers of his surgeon's hand holding one of the glasses. It was his habit in summer, at the end of evening, to sit out here drinking sherry, and he was doing it tonight. There was something admirable in the fact that he had made no exception of this one evening, and the usualness of it steadied me. I went across the stone flagging and sat down opposite him at the table. "Hello, Buck," he said, and smiled. "Hello, Dad." He liked me to call him that. "Your trip must have been hot and uncomfortable this time of year," he said, pouring me a glass of sherry. His hand, like his voice, was entirely steady. I lifted the glass and looked through the wine at the flame of the candle. Yes. The sherry was noble, neither dry nor sweet, and with a fine, full body. This is good stuff. The best. How are you feeling? Tired. He looked at me. We can talk about this thing in the morning. Don't feel you have to speak of it now. Thanks. He said nothing more, but continued to look at my face as if trying to read it. I avoided his eyes and told him, "The ashes are here, in the silver vase. I thought he'd like to have them in it." "That was good of you." In the silence that lay between us, I heard the bumbling of an insect against the glass of the lamp, and the faint slither of water moving on the beach below us. He was expecting me to speak, and I knew that I ought to say something to help him and to lessen the torment of his waiting. But there was nothing to say except, "Jerry's dead, and I've brought his ashes back to you in the silver vase." My mind was empty. The least word of thought echoed hollowly in it. "Don't try to talk, Buck. Sit here with me a few minutes, and then we'll go up to bed." I made an immense effort of will. It happened the day after I got out there, in the evening, a little earlier than this. I didn't tell you the whole story in my telegram. He shot himself. What he said next contained the whole quality of his character. So, I wondered what sort of accident it was. That was it, I said. He was quiet for a while. When he spoke next, his voice was remote, detached. Tell me how it happened. This was the danger point, I told myself. What I said now would either satisfy him or set him on the track of the mystery I was resolved he should not think about at all. He went into the little study. After a few minutes, we heard the shot. He was lying across the desk. The gun was on the floor beside him. We couldn't do anything for him. We? She and I. I see. He took a careful sip of wine. And there was no letter, no note? He didn't write anything to explain? No. I didn't want him to think about that, so I went on quickly. I got his body into the car and drove to Los Palos. As soon as I was through with the undertaker and the coroner, I caught the train home. What about her? That was another question I didn't want him to raise. I don't know. Did she drive into Los Palos with you? No. You didn't just leave her in the house. I looked squarely into his eyes and said, when I was ready to leave, she wasn't in the house. He was puzzled, I could see, and I was aware in some subtle way that he was beginning to doubt something in my story. You didn't see her again, then? No. That is strange. Very strange, and not quite like you either, Buck. He paused. Do you know where she is now? No. Look here, my boy, he said finally. I have somehow got the impression. There's no impression to get, Dad. I don't know where she was when I left the house, but I think she had gone up to the top of the mesa. I didn't know when she would come back, and I couldn't wait. She'll be all right. The sheriff's men drove the car back to the house. She can come away any time she wants to. He was staring out over the water, the clean outline of his profile with its high, thin nose and jutting chin stamped out in dull bronze against the night. I recognized the expression on his face, the sureness of his look, the calm determination in the set of his mouth. It was the way he looked when he performed a difficult operation. Buck, he said finally, are you in love with Selina yourself? The question shocked me. It was so wide of the mark. God, no. But you are afraid of something. I wondered if you were afraid of falling in love with Jerry's wife. I've never felt that way about her for a moment. Then, he said, I used to think you might be afraid for Jerry, that you had some intuition it would end like this. Was that it? I was grateful for the opening, the chance to give a logical excuse for the feeling he had managed to detect in me. Yes, I said, I was afraid of that. He withdrew his eyes from the dark stretches of the Sound and looked full at me. Then why are you still afraid? It has happened as you feared it might. What else is there still to dread? Nothing, I replied without meeting his eyes. You ran away from her. I don't understand that. Jerry told me she often went up to the mesa at night, alone. I left her because I thought that was the best way. I think she wanted me to leave her. He said, I see, in a tone entirely empty of conviction. Then, after a while, in a low voice and half to himself, I cannot believe that a son of mine would commit suicide, even if he was not happy with his wife. For the first time, his voice trembled slightly. Don't think about it. And then, knowing how his pride and his conviction of Jerry's fineness were being humbled, I said without thinking, and you've got to understand that what he did was not cowardly. Killing yourself is not a brave business. There was nothing I could say to that. It was a part of his own creed, and it was, I could have sworn, no less a part of Jerry's. He went on, slowly, to himself. I should have expected some word from him. For one instant the discipline of his face relaxed, and the grief and despair in his heart looked out on me. "Don't!" I cried. "Don't! He did think of you. There wasn't time—" and stopped, appalled. He looked up at me instantly. "You haven't told me everything!" "No, not everything." "Was he killed?" I didn't say anything, and he pressed me relentlessly. "Was he murdered? Did she kill him?" All the violence of his emotions, so sternly repressed up to now, was in the question. "No," I told him. "He shot himself. I saw him do it." "Ah," he said, quietly again. "You were in the room?" "Yes," I answered. "And she was there too?" It was a statement, not a question. "Yes." I added nothing more. He paused and watched me. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Will you tell me the whole story now?" "It wouldn't do any good, Dad, and it might do a lot of harm. The facts are the only things that matter, and I've told you those. I'm not holding anything really important back. Don't ask me any more questions, for God's sake." He looked at me quietly, and as happened between us sometimes, I knew what he was thinking. He expected me to remember the 15 years that the three of us had been together and come to realize that I must share with him whatever knowledge about this thing I had. Relying with such conviction on those years, on the tradition of absolute trust among the three of us, on 1,000 inescapable ties, he was sure that I would tell him the rest of it. But he did not know what he had to fight against. No anxiety to spare him or myself was holding me silent. It was, I admitted to myself, fear, and fear of an intangible something too slight to formulate in words. What exactly I was afraid to say I could not tell, but I understood that once I began to talk about it to him, it would become more definite and more horrible. Instinct told me that the less shape I gave that shadow, the better for the both of us. And if, by keeping silent, I had to forfeit his confidence and spoil a relationship that mattered deeply to me, that was nevertheless the smaller evil. I filled my pipe and lighted it, and I did not speak. The thing that broke my resolve was so trivial and fortuitous that I was not on guard against it. The absolute quiet that surrounded us was broken by the click, click, click of a dog's nails tapping on the slates of the terrace. Beyond Dr. Lister, in the penumbra of the candle glow, was a patch of familiar blackness. It came toward me gravely and joyfully, tail wagging and one crimson triangle of tongue lolling out. Boojum, Jerry's Scotty. With dignified eagerness he crossed the terrace and came to my chair. Sedately he sat up and put one black paw against my thigh. His head was cocked to one side, and his eyes were bright. It seemed to me that there was the inevitable question in them, and something hot rose in my throat. I put my hand on the rough hair of his skull and scratched him in the hollows behind his ears. He whined. I tried to say, "Boojum," and couldn't. Dr. Lister stirred in his chair. "You can't do it, Bark. I don't know what it is you haven't told me yet, but nothing will be right until you do." My resolution crumbled. Jerry had been my best friend. To let his father go on believing that he had causelessly, in a moment of insanity, shot himself was utterly unjust to him. And yet, even as I began to speak, the sort of quick stab went through me that comes when you realize that you have made an irreparable mistake. "There's something behind it," I said, "and I don't know what it is, but I know it's there." "What sort of thing?" he asked me. "That's what I don't know. But Jerry found out, and once he knew it, he killed himself. I've been afraid to think about it, and I still am. It's not an ordinary thing. It's connected with her, and with Lenormand, and with all sorts of things that have happened the last 2 years. He said, "If it will explain why my son committed suicide, I want to hear it. And if it's any question of justice, No, it's not a question of justice. Or even, and there was steel in his tone, of revenge. I looked up at the night above us, studded innumerably with stars. You can't revenge yourself, I told him. Here's the way it was. Boojum lay down across my feet as I talked. His body trembled slightly, like a car with an idling motor, as he panted. Dr. Lister listened, leaning forward and twirling the glass with its topaz wine between his long fingers. The night was a vault that shut us in and swallowed my words as I spoke them. I told him just what had happened when Jerry died. He heard me out with no sign of the agony it must have been for him. Only his face grew stiller, more sharply etched, and the glass in his hands revolved more and more slowly. I left out nothing, from the time I caught the Century out of New York to my return, except one thing that would mean nothing to anyone except me. I even told him my thoughts on the staircase coming down from my room, and of my fear. "And you haven't defined this thing you are afraid of, even to yourself?" he asked me when I had finished. "No," I answered. He took a sip of wine. "Between us, we ought to be able to understand it, if we think about it a little." "I don't want to think about it any more." "Then it will go on festering in your mind, and in mine as well. I'll always wonder if you could not have told me something more that would make this thing less intolerable." I said, "I don't want to die. Jerry thought this thing through, and that's why he's not alive now." He leaned forward, put his hand on mine for a brief second, and asked me, "Just what do you think living is for?" For him, perhaps for me, it was a fundamental question. Dr. Lister based his whole life on integrity, and he had taught me to do the same thing. Integrity of mind, of will, of loyalty to the people one loved. He believed that the purpose of life was to live it well. Unless he could explain to himself why Jerry had committed suicide, there would be, for him, a stain on his honor. I thought of a time when he had turned to me during one of the talks the three of us used to have about life and death and time and humanity and all the incomprehensible generalities, and said, gravely, "The one unforgivable fault is weakness." And now it appeared to him that his only son had done a weak and dishonorable thing. The foundations of his life were attacked by that act. Everything he lived by and had taught his son to cherish was smirched by it, put into question. There was nothing in life so important now as to probe into the motives behind Jerry's action and find there the honor and courage that his instinct told him must lie behind the immediate fact. It was not so easy for me. Although I loved Jerry and his father more than any two people on earth, I was not of quite the same breed. It is not necessary for me to know that every action of the people I belong with is founded on honor and courage. I think you have to be born into the aristocratic Spartan mind, and I was not. There is an easygoing, friendly, perhaps insubstantial strain in my family that is a part of me. But more immediate than my heritage was the memory of 2 days and 2 nights under Cloud Mesa. I had told Dr. Lister the story of what happened during them, very much as it is set down in this narrative in a later chapter, but I could not translate to him the odd, tight tone of Jerry's voice, a tone I had never heard before from him in spite of the dangerous moments we had shared, nor the calm, impersonal regret in Selina's eyes. I wondered if she was at that very minute on the flat tabletop of the enormous mesa, looking up at the western stars. And if she was, what was in her heart? As I imagined her there, a curious feeling of alarm went through me. Perhaps she was imagining me here in her mind, putting out the fingers of that damnable intelligence of hers to touch the stuff of my own brain. A prickle went along my spine at the thought. I did not want her to be thinking about me in any way. Dr. Lister's question was still heavy in the air between us. I had not answered it. If there was any point for me in the process of living, it lay in my relationships with people who were close to me, and if I was to preserve the one most important to me of all, I should have to tell him everything I knew, put each separate piece of the puzzle before him. And then the nameless fear in my mind would have a name, and what would happen after that, I couldn't even guess. "All right," I said, with despair and fear in my heart. "I'll tell you the rest of it." He smiled. "Good. I knew you would." He took out a cigarette, lit it, and poured each of us another glass of the sherry. "Whatever it is you're afraid of, we'll find the answers to it. There's nothing the human intelligence, properly applied, can't cope with." I tried to put behind my words all the conviction I felt. "Oh, yes, there is. Your intelligence won't be able to do much with this business if it is what I think. This isn't a detective story or a problem of deduction." He looked puzzled. "Well, I don't know what you mean, but I think I have an idea." "Don't think," I told him. "Thinking won't get you anywhere. Don't refer what I say to any system of logic or to your scientific training. I'm certain of one thing. The answer we are looking for doesn't lie in anything you or I know. Maybe it's in what we don't know. And perhaps there isn't any answer." He said quietly, "We'll see." "Yes," I answered, "we'll see. But not with logic. We tried before to solve Lenormand's death with our minds, and we failed. You know that. Now you want to know why your son killed himself. It's the one thing on earth that I never want to know. But I'll help you if I can. Whatever it is, Jerry found it out, and not by thinking." His look was a question. "He found out," I said brutally, "by living with it." "Ah." His fingers tightened on the stem of the glass. "Then it did all start with their marriage?" "No, before that." He nodded. "When they met, then?" "The day before that." I settled myself in my chair and put a fresh match to my pipe. "The day almost 2 years ago when Jerry and I drove down to the state game." And as I began to tell him about that, a cold finality settled upon my mind. Whatever the end, it was inevitable now. Thanks for tuning in, Allure E6. I am doing well, and hopefully yourself. Tuning in via Twitch, if I'm seeing correctly. Chapter 2, Autumn Weekend. "This looks good enough." "Sure," I agreed. Jerry cut the car off the edge of the concrete and into the mouth of the lane that ran back between scrubby thickets of second-growth trees. A few yards in was a battered sign that read, "To Adath Jeshurun Cemetery." "You have a cheerful taste in picnic grounds," I observed. He grinned. "It'll be quiet." There was a sort of turnaround in a clearing. We swung into it, and he cut the motor and ratcheted up the emergency. "Is this okay, or do you want to go clear in and look at the monuments?" Getting out of the car, my legs were stiff. It had been a long drive, and cold. "Do they have monuments?" "Damned if I know." He handed out the cardboard box of sandwiches. There were 4 sandwiches and a couple of hard-boiled eggs in it. I laid them out on the running board. Jerry was rummaging in the compartment back of the seat. In a moment he produced a bottle of scotch, 2 or 3 bottles of White Rock, and a couple of lily cups. I set them out beside the sandwiches. The whole display looked attractive. "We ought to photograph that and send it in to Esquire," I suggested. "The smart picnic for young graduates returning to their alma maters for football games." I don't want to photograph it. I want to eat it and drink it right now. He poured out 2 stiff ones in the lily cups and splashed in a little white rock. God, it's cold. This ought to be good for what ails us. We touched the rims of the cups together. Well, I said, here's to 'em, and to hell with state. The scotch was good, warm all the way down. We sat on the running board and began on the sandwiches, talking about the team between swallows. A raw November wind was rustling around in the bushes like a rat in a packing case. Even at noon, and with the sun shining, it was cold. After a while, we didn't notice it so much, and by the time the scotch was all gone, we felt a whole lot better. We agreed that State was going to be tough, but Mortensen, our right half, would be the best back on the field, and our line was sure to be stronger. Jerry thought we'd win by 4 touchdowns. I wasn't so sure. Anyway, it was going to be a great game. After a while, we stuck the empty bottle and the box and the papers into a pile of brush and got back into the car. "Goodbye, folks," said Jerry, nodding up the road. "Sorry you can't come with us." He swung the big car around with a rush, and we headed on toward the game. The scotch inside us was fine. It was a fine day. Everything was fine. We sang "The Best Old Place of All" at the top of our lungs. The road went away under the tires in a slipstream of blurred gray. By and by we saw the towers come up against the sky. Drunk or sober, I love that place, and it always makes a lump in my throat to see those sharp Gothic pinnacles notch up above the trees. Neither of us had been back in the 2 years since graduation, and I suppose we got sentimental about the fact. Then we were in the midst of traffic, and everything began to feel like a football game. We had to park half a mile from the stadium, and by the time we got to the portal, the exercise of walking and the cold air had reduced the effects of the scotch to a pleasant glow. There was the usual push and jostle around the turnstile, and a classmate whose name neither of us could recall who seemed unwholesomely glad to see us. Once inside the gate, we brushed through a phalanx of freshmen who wanted to sell us programs, cushions, and God knows what. The muffled blare of bands was pouring down the tunnels from the bowl, and outside the door of the ladies' room was the inevitable sore-looking gent with a folded blanket over his arm, worrying for fear he was going to miss the kickoff. We shuffled down our tunnel with the roar of 70,000 people coming at us from the other end, louder and louder. Then the field, amazingly green and mathematically striped with white, and on it the 2 teams warming up. And here we have a flash forward, denoted by italics. Dr. Lister moved a little in his chair and said, "Don't bother with all these details, Bach, unless you want to." I've got to tell the thing this way," I replied. "These things are all part of the picture. You won't find the answer anywhere but in the whole story. Besides, something happened at the game that may have a meaning." He nodded and drew on his cigarette. I took a sip of sherry and went on. We were going to kick off. Our boys were strung across the field just behind their own 40-yard line. They looked fine with the sun catching their gold helmets and their light gray jerseys new and clean. The State 11 in red and black weren't so pretty, but they looked like ball players. Big Dan Hevitt, our left tackle, was going to kick it. He raised himself on his toes and began to run forward. As his boot met the ball, the line of gold and gray was surging forward. The ball arced up into the air. There's something about a kickoff, something indescribable and thrilling. It's the curtain going up on a new play. It's the little white roulette ball clicking into the compartment. It's waking up Christmas morning when you're 10 years old. Underneath the ball, as it tumbled end over end through the air, the 2 teams flowed into each other. Men were sprawling out on the grass. The kick was coming down in coffin corner. The State man who caught it never had a chance. Thompson and Ives, for us, hit him like a ton of bricks. And as he went down, the ball squirted out of his arms. One of our gray jerseys fell on it instantly. The noise in the bowl was terrific. Jerry was pounding my back, and I his, and both of us were yelling. There was a flask in my pocket. We each took a short, quick nip from it. They lined up. The ball was on the 13-yard line. We tried a tackle slant that didn't gain a thing, and then on the next play, Mortensen started around right end. He was a beautiful ball carrier, always driving fast with his knees high. He went over the lines standing up. Not a state man even touched him. There was so much noise on our side of the field that I could not hear myself yelling. "Jesus!" Jerry bawled into my ear. "Was that sweet?" Even though he'd made his Phi Beta Key junior year, Jerry's language at such moments was always unacademic. While Hewitt was kicking the goal, I got out the flask again, and we had a stiff one apiece to celebrate. The liquor was warm, but we didn't care. The score was us 7, State 0, and the band was playing The Best Old Place of All as the boys drifted down the field and got ready to kick off again. The state receiver didn't fumble the second time. The red and black jerseys were mad. Their line was charging like bulls, the interfering backs were diving at our boys savagely, and little by little the ball worked its way up the field till the two lines were right below us. Jerry was watching the play like a hawk and silently, except for a few profane and professional comments to me out of the side of his mouth. He'd made his own letter senior year, and perhaps he was too technically intent to notice a thing that began to make a curious impression on me. Something was happening to the crowd. Yard by yard, the ball was moving down the field. Our team was roused now and fighting. The two lines were meeting on even terms. The tackling was growing more and more savage. The state side of the bowl had been a torrent of noise during that long advance, everybody over there standing up on every play. It was terrific to watch. The two lines taut against each other, the flash of the ball as the center shot it back, the slog of the lines as they met, and the wedge of red and black jerseys that disintegrated in the welter of our tacklers. Old-fashioned football, perhaps, but it was tremendous drama, and the crowd knew it. Now, comparatively, it was growing quieter and quieter in the bowl. Even up in our seats we began to hear the hoarse, panting voice of the quarterback calling out the starting numbers, and the thud of the tackles. There were almost no cheers. 70,000 people were sitting silent, leaning forward in their seats, welded into one unit, I began to realize. The back of my neck prickled with awareness of the mass emotion focused on the two teams, the game below us. The whole bowl was filled with human excitement, with hope and fear, with longing for triumph or a desperation of defense. Once I'd noticed it, it seemed to me I could almost taste the damn thing in the air. It was more real than the blue haze of tobacco smoke rising lazily up the slope of the stands. And as I became fully aware of that quality, that intensity, it began to make me somehow uneasy. I wondered if it was like that when there was a lynching or a war. I had an impression of frightening power without control, of a field of force in some other dimension than our usual three. Perhaps in that fourth dimension of time, for I have no idea how long the whole thing lasted. It may have been only a minute or two, possibly no more than a few seconds. Anyway, it ended with when Stanwix, the state halfback, faded back and arched a long pass dead into the hands of his own right hand, who scored right then and there. At once, the feeling of tension broke. The state side of the stadium turned into a riot of color and sound, and around us the gloom was thick. But oddly enough, I felt happier than I had the moment before. It was a relief to have the suspense over with, to know the worst, and to be free of whatever it was that I had just been feeling. "Let's have a drink," said Jerry. "We're always suckers for forward passes. That end ought to have been covered." I gave him the flask and took a small one myself after he was through. Just then, State missed the try for point, and the score was still in our favor, 7-6. Jerry grinned. After 3 years of Bart Wilmoth's coaching, he wasn't what the English would call sporting about football. In the game, his idea was to win, and win by as big a score as possible. No dirty playing, no cheating of any sort, but fight like hell all the time. Be on the long end of the score when the timekeeper fires the final gun, and never mind about giving 3 cheers for the other side when they score on you.
If Mortensen can get away once more on that 32 play, he observed, it'll just be a question of how big a score we can run up. The State boys have about shot the works.
But Mortensen didn't get away. We were crowding them all the rest of the half, and all through the second half as well, but we never quite put the ball across for another touchdown. Up and down the field the 2 teams surged, and there was a lot of good, hard football played, but it was all an anticlimax after the opening quarter. I kept waiting to feel that sense of crowd unity and mass emotion, but it did not develop again. The game was grand, but it remained a spectacle and nothing more. When the timekeeper's pistol cracked for the end, the score was still 7-6. Before the last half hour was over, the sun had dropped behind Orchard Hill, and it was bitter cold in the stadium. My feet were numb, and even finishing off my flask hadn't kept us really warm. We didn't join the snake dance. Neither of us gives a damn for pieces of goalposts, and we felt decidedly let down as we worked our way toward the portal. It hardly seemed to matter that our team had won. There was no exhilaration of victory at all. We were both quiet and conscious of the fact that the liquor had begun to wear off. I've said a good deal about our drinking, but the truth is that we were not drunk or anywhere near it. I'm going to mute things for a sec while the emergency passes. I should really have my window closed, but the air is so fresh. Crisp and brisk, just like I like it. Where were we? We were both quiet and conscious of the fact that the liquor had begun to wear off. I've said a good deal about our drinking, but the truth is that we were not drunk, or anywhere near it. For one thing, we had been out of doors all day, and the not inconsiderable amount of scotch we'd consumed had all been drunk in the open air, and the cold. We were simply tired and somewhat cold as we waited for the crowd to empty out of the tunnels, and then drifted along through the outer gate of the stadium. One sec, I had a cover image I wanted to swap to. Give me one moment here. Pretty sure I know where it is. That one. Yeah, that's the one. So, Jeremiah Lister and Barclay M. Jones stood outside the gate of the stadiums, whence practically all but them had fled. It was nearly dark. The stars were splattering all except the western sky, and, if I can flip a page, and it was as cold as Siberia. We began to walk back toward the car in silence. After a while, Jerry said something under his breath and stopped short in the road. "Well?" I asked him.
I just had an idea.
"No, thanks," I told him firmly. "I've already had all the scotch I'm having today." Jerry laughed.
Yeah. Now that your flask is empty,
"What other idea is there?"
it seems pretty flat. Just heading back to New York now. Our first time here in 2 years.
There was something in that. We could drop around and see the boys at the lodge. Its members always referred to our fraternity as the Lodge.
Nah, let's go see Lenormand.
It seemed inappropriate. I thought of that middle-aged, punctilious, intellectual scholar. "In the shape we're in now?" I asked in surprise.
Sure, he'll be just the thing after that emotional debauch of a football game.
He went on with a grin.
My God, I never realized before how hard the crowd at a game has to work. When you're playing, you get pooped and work up an honest sweat. But when you're watching a game like that one, you're absolutely all in at the end of it.
I'm going to try that again, where I don't fumble the whole thing. Football metaphors.
When you're playing, you get pooped and work up an honest sweat, but when you're watching a game like that one, you're absolutely all in at the end of it.
Still, I wasn't too interested in the idea. What about the liquor on our breath? I suggested.
He'll never notice it. He's always smoking that smudge pot of a pipe. Anyway, I haven't seen him since we got out, and he's a decent egg. The perfect antidote to the late lamented orgy.
He turned and struck off toward the campus. I went along. Jerry had always liked Lenormand. He'd been the only man our year to take the course in celestial mechanics, and he and Lenormand used to spend whole nights in the observatory, talking over everything under as well as in the heavens. Lenormand must have been very lonely after he came over to this country. The university had bribed him away from some English college where he'd made a brilliant record. When he got here, he found most of us pretty unregenerate, astronomically speaking, and the new equipment he'd been promised somehow never did materialize. So he kept to himself, did what research he could, I suppose, with the inadequate telescope already there, and only let himself go with one or two intimates on the faculty, and with Jerry. He never went out socially, so far as I know, and the rumor was that he hadn't spoken to a woman since his mother. A silent, reserved, intensely intellectual and hard-working man, as I remembered him. Our senior year, he published something entitled, as near as I can recall it, A Fundamental Critique of the Einstein Space-Time Continuum. Maybe that isn't the exact wording, but it conveys the general idea. I found it unreadable myself. Out of the first 50 words, I knew the meaning of only 28, and it turned out later that I was wrong about one of those. Jerry waded through it, and with the help of his bull sessions with the author, claimed he knew what it was all about. That's not important, perhaps. What matters is that the article brought down a storm of abuse on Lenormand. Apparently, the rest of the boys in the Astronomy League doubted everything about it, from its mathematics to Lenormand's sanity. If he hadn't been such a famous man to begin with, Jerry thought, they'd have asked him to resign from the faculty. Within a week after the article was published, the scientific mudslinging had begun, and Jerry must have been the only supporter Lenormand had. Probably it was nothing but loyalty on his part, but I could never be sure with Jerry. He had a curious facility for picking out the right answer, for cutting through to the truth even without knowing all the facts. And I know Lenormand wanted him to do graduate work in mathematics. Anyway, it was a case of two of them against the rest of the world, at least as Jerry saw it. Lenormand and he would engage in terrific correspondences with rival astronomers all over the world. Some nights Jerry wouldn't get back to the room till 3 or 4 in the morning. He did all the typing of those letters for the professor. But that business stopped long before graduation. I remember that one night Jerry came back from the observatory about 11. I was surprised. I hadn't expected to see him before morning. "You and Lenormand didn't run out of words to call the other nuts, did you?" I inquired. He tossed his hat on the window seat and sat down at his desk. "Yes," he said. "You mean," I asked incredulously, "Lenormand admits he's licked?" "Hell no." Jerry was irritated. "He's just not writing any more letters. He told me tonight it would be stupid and perhaps dangerous." "Dangerous? Why? He might lose his job?" Jerry shook his head, puzzled. "I don't think that was it." "Well, then it must be that he's afraid of the other guys, I suppose. They are hellions when roused. Oh, I don't know how to read punctuation marks. Well, then it must be that he's afraid of the other guys. I suppose they are hellions when roused." I could see I was annoying him a little. "Don't be a damn fool." He was silent a moment. "It was a good row while it lasted. I used to enjoy those letters he wrote, you know. He's got a knack of saying the nastiest things in the most abstract sort of way. And the funny thing about it all," he paused. "Is what?" I prompted him. "Is that he's just as right as he was originally." Maybe they've shaken his faith. The shot did not seem to penetrate.
Maybe so. He was thoughtful. But I'll tell you this, he had the answer to everything they wrote to him, and they didn't have the answers to his stuff.
I put that down to Jerry's loyalty. Probably he got sick of the whole argument. Perhaps, he said, and began talking about something else. He told me later that Lenormand never brought up the subject of that article again, and he didn't dare mention it to him. But he puzzled about it a long time after. Lenormand's attitude was what he couldn't get over. The whole episode came back to me as we stumbled up the road to the campus. I turned toward Jerry. I suppose you want to find out the latest news on the Lenormand versus Einstein contest, I suggested. There was an almost imperceptible pause before he spoke, so I knew I had guessed what he was thinking about.
I don't know. I won't bring it up right at first.
Listen, I said, if you two savants are going to sit up till all hours talking mathematics, relativity, or whatever the hell, I'm not coming.
We won't. I just want to say hello to him again. He was damn decent to me, and he's a lonely man.
I was undecided. Maybe I better not butt in on your call.
Don't be a damn fool, said Jerry.
But I was, and proved it by walking on up the hill beside him. We were on campus now. Splashes of warm and cheerful light were coming out of the windows of the dorms, and more than a suspicion of the sounds of revelry by night. Our breaths were dimly white in the air. Jerry was walking briskly. I could tell he was eager to get there, maybe to get there and get it over with. Our shoes made crisp, far-reaching sound on the slate flagging of the walk. The Eldridge Observatory is on the highest part of the campus, a cube of a building with a white, bulbous dome at the top. It's one of the simplest structures imaginable, 2 stories high and with a couple of classrooms on the ground floor. The instrument room, as Jerry called the actual place where the telescope was, occupied the whole of the 2nd floor and was roofed by the dome. Lenormand used it for his office as well. There was, why do I keep saying was? Not everything in this story is in the past tense. There is only one door to the place. We could see it ahead of us at the top of the walk we were on.
He's there, said Jerry with satisfaction. The light's on over the door.
We went on up the walk. There's an old saying that every step you take is a step toward your grave. The door was shut. Jerry rapped on it a couple of times, but nobody answered. He's gone home for dinner, I suggested.
Nah, said Jerry. He always turns off the light when he leaves. He must be in there.
He knocked again on the door. It was cold where we stood in the dark, and still, except for a faint slither of wind through the leafless trees. I shivered. Let's go and find a drink. Jerry shook his head and put his hand on the knob.
Let's make sure he's not here first.
The door opened, and we went inside quietly. The light in the shallow hall was on, a single raw, yellow globe that left even that small space half dark. The doorways to the classrooms at the right and left were open rectangles of blackness. There wasn't a sound. I felt my guts contract. It was one of those times when some subconscious part of you is afraid for no reason. A deserted house will give me the same feeling.
Hello, Lenormand,
Jerry called. I suppose he wasn't speaking loudly at all, but his voice rang in that little hall. There was no answer. Or wasn't there? As I think over it now, I am not so sure. Perhaps there was a thin sliver of sound above us. I can't quite dredge it up out of my memory, but it was as though someone in the room above us had shifted position ever so slightly. Probably it was nothing. A couple of steps in front of us was the round iron pillar about which revolved a spiral of steel stairs. That is, how you get up to the instrument room. We looked at it. It's all dark up there, I said. Let's go find a drink someplace and... Jerry took a half step forward, looking up to the place where the stair cut through the ceiling like an auger.
I think he's up there, he said with a faintly puzzled tone. Nuts. He must have heard you and he hasn't answered. Jerry was obstinate. Yes, but I think I see a light up there. I craned past his shoulder. At first I couldn't make out what he meant, but then I did notice something. There was a flicker of light filtering through between the treads of the top 2 steps. That's just what it was, too. A flicker of light, not steady, but wavering from bright to dim and then bright again. "Hey, Lenormand!" Jerry cried. Nothing. Not a sound in reply. Only the light kept on flicking. "Hell," said Jerry. "I'm going up." I was right at his heels as we climbed the curving iron stair, just far enough behind to keep my nose from getting kicked. Jerry kept going round and up faster and faster with an odd urgency, and beyond him the flickering, wavering light grew stronger and stronger till he was nothing but a silhouette in front of me. He took the last few steps 2 at a time. "Come on!" He flung at me over his shoulder. "Come on, for God's sake!" We burst into the instrument room almost side by side. Lenormand was there, all right. Chapter 3. The Stars Are Fire. Dr. Lister interrupted me. "Bach, we've all 3 talked this over so often." "Yes," I agreed, filling my pipe again slowly, "but always as a mystery, a problem of detection. I have begun to wonder if we've ever discussed it, ever thought about it another way." He looked hard at me without a word. Well, I can't tell you just yet what I do mean, but I want to go over the whole thing just once more, impersonally, narratively. Negative evidence is as important as positive. Listen without thinking of the dozens of theories we've formed and discarded in the past 2 years. And remember, I felt my voice grow unsteady, that Jerry, too, is dead now. Still, he said nothing, though I thought his face had lost a little of its color. Around us and above us the night was black. Orion had swung imperceptibly toward the western horizon. I struck a match and laid it on the tobacco in my pipe bowl. The flame leaped and shrank as I drew on the bit. Its light flickered and wavered, like the light in the instrument room of Eldridge Observatory on that night 2 years ago, when Jerry and I burst into it. The room was round and perhaps 20 feet in diameter. It was roofed by the observatory dome, an inverted bowl with a great slot cut out of it where the slide was open. I remember that the stars were sharply visible through the opening. The walls and the inside of the dome were painted gray, or some light-absorbing color, and the floor was bare. The telescope mounted on a concrete base in the middle of the room. The telescope was mounted on a concrete base in the middle of the room, and its long barrel was aimed up and through the slide in the dome, trained on some star 1,000 light-years away, I suppose. In the silence of the room there was a single sound, the ticking of the clockwork motor that revolved the dome above us, moving it with the same tremendous precision as the earth itself, spinning on its axis. Between us and the telescope was Lenormand's plain deal work table, with a single hooded gooseneck student's lamp spilling a little circle of light out on its top. Back to us stood a wooden chair, varnished oak, of the sort that universities must buy in carload lots. Lenormand was sitting in that chair, looking at us. His arms hung straight from his shoulders, and his head was so far bent over the top of the chair back that it was completely upside down. His eyes were open, looking right at us, but there was no expression on his face at all. It was like the face of a man asleep.
Of course, he must have been dead even then, but it still seems to me that the eyes moved once, just as we appeared in the doorway. Fire was growing up his back and around his head like a great vine. Tentacles of it licked the back of the chair and wavered to and fro over his body. There was a great blossom of flame around his head. His face looked out at us between petals of live fire. It was not the kind of fire that a burning log gives. A yellow, lambent glow. It was not like anything I ever saw before. Clear, clear white, silent, flickering as fast as a snake's tongue, writhing like streamers of kelp in a tide race. It twined over and around and into the body of Lenormand as he sat there. It was a parasite on him, possessing and consuming him, apparently endued with a life of its own and nourished by its host, Lenormand. In the instant we stood, fixed with horror and amazement, in the doorway, we began to smell what the fire was doing, the choking fume of burning hair, and another smell that was still worse. Lots of things happened in the next 10 seconds. I ordered my legs to take me down the stairs and out of that appalling room. Instead, they seemed to be carrying me straight toward Lenormand. As I went, I remember vaguely that I struggled out of my overcoat. Jerry had leaped to the wall near the stairwell, and out of the corner of my eye I saw him snatch down the fire extinguisher down. Wow. Out of the corner of my eye I saw him snatch down the fire extinguisher there. Got focused on trying to flip the page ahead of time that I flubbed the sentence. The blast of heat and the stench as I got nearer was terrific. With the coat in front of me, I flung myself at that incandescent figure on the chair. It and I went over together with a crash. As we struck the floor, a tongue of flame went across my face. Then I was kicking the chair away from me and wrapping Lenormand in the folds of my coat. Something cold and wet bit the back of my head, and I began to choke. "Roll clear," I heard Jerry tell me. His voice was cool and urgent. I flung myself to the side and scrambled to my feet. With the fire blanketed by my coat, the room was almost dark. Jerry was standing with spraddled legs, the fire extinguisher in one hand and the nozzle of its short hose in the other. A jet of hissing liquid probed something black and huddled on the floor. Tendrils of smoke were rising. Jerry kicked back a corner of the coat and turned the stream of chemical on whatever was underneath. That was all I saw. I went down the stairs as fast as I could. My knees were weak as hell. I just about got outside in time. When I was too exhausted to gag any more, I went back up. My mouth tasted of bile and scotch, and yet I could still smell that acrid, sweetish smoke of burning flesh. When I got back, all the lights in the instrument room were on. The place looked impersonal. Jerry had supplemented my coat with his own, but except for that one long, dark blotch on the floor, the overturned chair, and a puddle of stuff from the extinguisher, there was no change. I pulled myself up the last 2 steps by the handrail and went into the room. Jerry looked at me. His face was white. He licked his lips, started to say something, and stopped. I couldn't think of anything to say. Most of my mind was busy telling my stomach to stay in the usual place. Finally, the silence got to me. I felt that unless I said something, I should be sick again. "Well," I managed to get out. "Are you all right?" I wasn't entirely sure. "Yeah, if I didn't lose any essential part of me down there." "Jesus, I'm sorry." "I'm okay now," I told him. Have you... I didn't know how to put the question. Jerry nodded. "I looked at him. He's dead all right." "I see you used your overcoat, too." He looked away and said, "His feet were sticking out." I saw him swallow. Neither of us said anything for a minute after that. I got to thinking, what do we do now? Jerry took a couple of steps toward the overcoats and then stopped. "I've been wondering about that myself." "We ought to tell somebody." He almost smiled.
Sure, but just who?
What do you mean?
Well, there's the dean, and there's Prexy, and we might get a doctor from the infirmary, and the undertaker, and the police, of course.
This last was a new idea to me, but it made sense. There'd have to be some sort of investigation into how Lenormand had come to die. That fire. I guess we ought to call the police. Jerry admitted that. But it was a university matter, any way you looked at it. As he pointed out, this would be front-page news tomorrow, and it was important that we do the whole thing carefully. We talked it over and agreed the safest thing to do would be to call Prexy and leave it up to him. He could handle it any way he wanted.
Listen, said Jerry, when we'd agreed on that. Suppose you phone him. There's a couple of things here I want to look at.
Probably he saw I was still pretty shaky. There's nothing here I ever want to see again, I said, and went down the stairs. At the bottom of the spiral there was a telephone, one of the old-fashioned kind with the brown oak box, fastened to the wall. The university had its own on-campus system. I picked up the receiver. After quite some time, a kid's bored voice said in my ear, "University. Get me President Murray." "He's not to be disturbed. There's a trustees' dinner tonight." I was annoyed. This guy was probably a green kid with a scholarship. "Listen, freshman," I told him, "this is an eccentric old millionaire who wants to leave the U $1 million, and I want to talk to Murray. Get him." "Yes, sir." Bells rang, clicks occurred, and eventually Prexy's smooth, careful voice was there in the receiver. "This is President Murray." In the 4 years at the university, I'd never spoken to Prexy before. I was suddenly nervous. "President Murray, I'm Bart Jones, class of '32. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Jones. I'm extremely busy at the moment. If there is anything I can do for you—" I cut him short. "This is serious, sir. I'm not drunk or playing a practical joke. I'm at the observatory, and there's been a serious accident. Jerry Lister, a classmate of mine, and I think you had best come up here right away." His voice changed its quality. Some of the smoothness went out of it. It became alert, suspicious, a trifle peremptory. "What sort of accident?" I told him Professor Lenormand was dead. He didn't believe me. I told him again. "Mr. Jones, if this is not absolutely—" "Absolutely and positively," I affirmed. "Have you notified anyone else?" "No," I said. "We considered that this was a university matter. We want you to come at once and take the thing off our hands. Better come alone. It's a nasty business." His voice still sounded incredulous, but he told me, "Very well, I shall be there in 10 minutes. I hung up and sat down on the bottom step. My legs felt like boiled macaroni, and my mouth still tasted abominably. There was a high, continuous ringing sound in my ears. "Hey, Bark!" It was Jerry's voice from the top of the stairs. "Coming," I told him, and decided on the way up to keep count of the number of times I had to climb those damn stairs. This was the 3rd trip. Jerry had turned out the lights again and found a couple of chairs someplace. He made me sit down, first producing, to my pleased surprise, a flask. "If you think you can hold this down, you better have some." I held it down all right. It was fine stuff, Irish, and it must have come out of the family cellar. Our drinking and our talk, as I reproduce it, sounds callous. Perhaps it was. But after a shock like the one we had just experienced, your emotions retreat to some quiet corner of your brain and you set up, in self-protection, a superficial toughness of mind to keep from going crazy. I was glad to get a drink, and because I could not tolerate too much silence in that room, I accused him of holding out on me. "Always prepared," he replied. "I used to be a Boy Scout once." His manner changed, and he stared at the floor for some moments without speaking, as though he were trying to decide about something difficult. "I suppose Prexy's on his way?" "Said he'd be here in 10 minutes. Jerry nodded. "There's a couple of things we better talk over before he comes back, Bark." Oh, there's a couple of things we better talk over before he comes, Bark. My God, I said. This thing is foul enough already. I don't want to talk about it. Let Prexy shoulder the grief. He cut me short. That's all very well. I don't like this any better than you do. Besides, Lenormand was my friend. I'm sorry. Forget it. We're going to be asked a whole lot of questions, Bark. Prexy first, and then the police, and then, I suppose, the newspapers. Just what are we going to tell them? Why, that we came in here, I suppose it was about 6 o'clock, and found Lenormand here, burning up in his chair, and... Jerry looked hard at me. Yeah, we came in here, and Lenormand was in his chair with his head hanging down over the back of it, and he was burning. Burning like a torch. Suppose somebody told you that story. It did sound unconvincing when he put it as baldly as that. The questions I'd been fighting to keep out of my mind began to stampede into it. How did the fire start? How could Lenormand have just sat there while it burned him alive? Had he carelessly jammed a lighted pipe into his pocket and set fire to his clothes that way? Then he must have died soon after, because no man would sit calmly in his chair and be burned to death. Heart failure? Perhaps that was it. Jerry cut in on my thoughts. While you were telephoning, I looked around this place. It's going to be pretty hard to explain how it happened, Bark. You saw him just as we came in. Did you think he was dead then? He must have been. Did you think he was? No, I had to admit. I thought I saw his eyes move. I thought he was looking at us. He nodded. So did I. Maybe it was the flicker of the fire. He paused. Take a look at that chair, but don't touch it. There may be fingerprints. I got up slowly and crossed the room to the overturned chair. I had to force one foot deliberately and consciously ahead of the other to get there, and it took every ounce of willpower to do it. Leaning over carefully, so as to include nothing else in the room in my field of vision, I looked at the chair. Of course, at the time, it was dark in the room, but even the light from one gooseneck lamp was enough to show that the chair was not the way I'd expected it to be. Instead of being blackened with fire and charred clear up the back, it was almost unmarked. There were a few varnish blisters toward the top of the back, but that was all. I thought of that flick of fire that had gone across my face when I tackled Lenormand and couldn't decide whether it had felt hot or not. It must have. All fires are hot, so I must have felt the heat, but I couldn't remember that I had. And apparently the chair hadn't. It simply was not burned. I turned toward Jerry. This is the damnedest thing. He nodded and said carefully, I looked at him too. His back is burned clear through. My stomach began to turn on its foundations. I'll take your word for that. You know, he observed calmly, this thing is going to look like a crime. In fact, a murder. A torch murder. I left the chair and went back to him. And we'll be the principal witnesses? Witnesses, said Jerry. Or else what? Suspects. Nuts, I said. They won't suspect us. The only way out of this place is the front door. We had it in view for 5 minutes before we got here. Did you see anyone come out? It was dark. Jerry looked at me sadly. Yes, it was dark, but we'd have seen the motion at least if someone had slipped out. Unless the police find some other goat, it looks to me as if we'd be unanimously elected. Somebody did it. I could see the point. We might be in for a nasty time. How about saying that we did see somebody, just a shadow, go out the door? He didn't think much of that idea. In fact, his opinion was that it wouldn't pay to lie to the police. I thought privately that it might be accident or suicide or lots of things besides murder, but I could see that Jerry was right about one thing. We were going to be in the limelight for a couple of days. Our final decision was that each of us would tell his own story and stick by it. All the time we were talking, Jerry was wandering round the room, looking at everything. There were some scattered papers and a pencil on top of the work table, and he spent some time staring at them. As far as I could tell, the papers had equations of some sort on them, and Jerry finally decided to copy them into his notebook, though he kept muttering that they didn't make sense and he couldn't understand them at all. The paper was the sort they sell by the tablet at the university co-op, and the edges of the leaves looked faintly yellow, as if the sheets were old. I began to feel completely shot. My legs ached, my head ached. I felt dirty all over, and tired to death. There was a nasty taste in my mouth. "What the hell's keeping Prexy?" I said fretfully. "I want to get a shower and some sleep. I feel like the latter end of a misspent life." Jerry grinned. "You ain't seen nothing yet. Forget about the shower and the sleep. Just impress this place and the way everything is in it on your mind. We'll be questioned till we're liable to forget our own names." He was obviously right, and I tried to follow his advice. But there were so few things to look at, and the whole affair was so conspicuously a nightmare, that it all began to seem unreal to me. I wondered if I had DTs. Maybe this was the way they took you. Perhaps if I could get a hold of some sleep and a competent doctor, I'd be cured of the whole illusion. Just then there was a swish of tires on the gravel. "Brexy's here," said Jerry, "and now the fun begins." We crossed to the head of the spiral stairs. There was a slam of a car door and the brisk click of the latch at the entrance. "Mr. Jones!" His big voice boomed out in the hall below. "Right up here, sir," I called down. He came up the stairs, irritation and purpose in every stamp of his feet on the treads. "Mr. Jones, I trust the extraordinary story you told me over the telephone a few minutes ago—" And he was in the room, his words abruptly silenced by its quiet austerity. Before he had perfect control of himself, I heard him give a single sniff, as the impact of the smell still lingering in the air took him by surprise. Even though he did not see Lenormand at once, he said nothing, asked no questions, but looked swiftly about him. He had no doubt in the world after that first breath. Prexy is a fine-looking man, as big as a house and built like an athlete, with a granite face and hair as gray as stone. His manner is heavy rather than pompous, and he never appears to be at a loss. My own idea is that his worst enemy has been a terrible temper, and that he has learned to keep it chained up so tight that he gives an impression of being almost devoid of feeling. I always think of him more as a major in the Marines than as an educator. Sometimes I suspect he does himself. There's no doubt, though, that his iron purpose and executive force have put life into the whole university. That evening he was dressed for a formal dinner, tails and white tie. Jerry broke the momentary silence. "Over there," he said, with a flash of his eye toward the long, dark bundle on the floor. "Thank you," said Prexy. "You're Mr. Lister?" "Yes." "I'll talk to you both about this in a moment." He went across the room, evenly, steadily. Then he was kneeling beside our overcoats. I saw one hand reach out to draw them back, and looked quickly away. The clockwork of the dome ticked steadily on. The pinprick stars burned in the black sky beyond the opening, and I could see my breath, faintly frosty in the cold air of the room. When I looked again, Prexy was just standing up. He came back to us, glancing from Jerry to me without the slightest expression of any sort on his face. But I'd swear it was whiter than it had been, and the lips more firmly pressed together. "You gentlemen did exactly the right thing in calling me," he said. "It's Lenormand, and he's dead." Jerry said, "I think you better hear our story before doing anything further." And he told the whole thing, quickly and concisely. When he had finished, Prexy asked, "Have you anything to add to that, Mr. Jones?" "No, sir." "Mr. Lister, Mr. Jones, you must surely be aware that your story is almost impossible to believe. Your account of the discovery of Professor Lenormand's body is absolutely incompatible with the nature and extent of the burns." His voice was not quite so decisive. "I have never seen a human body so—" He paused for a word. "So nearly incinerated." I couldn't think of a thing to say. Neither of us could. We stood there, silent, with our eyes on his face. Prexy seemed disappointed. "You both came down to the game this afternoon?" We nodded. "Unless you are extraordinary young men, you have both taken a few drinks. How many?" I told him, and he listened, apparently without disapproval. "But we're not drunk, sir," I concluded. "The story Lister and I have told you is true, absolutely, in every detail." He frowned. "It can't be true. However this thing happened, a man would not sit in his chair and allow himself to be burned to death." His voice faded. "Unless he was dead already," Jerry said. "Heart failure?" Prexy's voice was doubtful. "On the other hand, what about that fire? Does anything about it strike you?" Jerry's intonation almost demanded an affirmative answer. "He always used to smoke a pipe," I said. "Perhaps he put it in his pocket before it was entirely out, and then his heart failed, and his clothes caught on fire, and—" Prexy stopped me with one look. "A wool suit smolders, Mr. Jones. It does not burn like that. It could not have created a fire that must have been as hot as a blowtorch. That is why I wish to make sure that your story is complete. You have left out nothing? You are concealing nothing?" "No," said Jerry flatly. Prexy tried again. "It is my duty to report this to the police," he said, "and the moment I do so, there will be an investigation. You must both understand that you will be questioned over and over again. The police will be as dissatisfied with your story as I am." Jerry laughed, a little sharply. "President Murray, we have been over all this together. We debated inventing a more plausible story to tell you and the police. We decided to stick to the truth." Some idiotic impulse made me add, "Integer vitae scleresque purus. You know, sir." Prexy smiled faintly. "Ah, these little tags of learning do stick, Mr. Jones. Let me advise you not to try them on Chief Hanlon. I fear that, like Shakespeare, he has little Latin and less Greek." Jerry looked pleased with me. I think he imagined I had made a dint in Prexy's court-martial calm. But he brought the conversation back at once to the focal point by asking, "Did you look at the chair, sir?" "No, I didn't." Prexy's tone was impatient, but at once he went across the room and examined it, just as I had done. As he straightened up, he looked at Jerry incredulously and said, "And you are still determined to stick to your evidence that Professor Lenormand was actually sitting in this chair when you found his burning body? What else can we do?" He didn't seem to have an answer to that. Frowning thoughtfully, he began to inspect the room in detail, staring at its meager furniture and the howitzer barrel of the telescope with puzzled eyes. We watched him apathetically, and when he came back across the room, Jerry said flatly, "Nothing." "Nothing, as you say, Mr. Lister. Nothing at all." It seemed to me that this was going on forever, that the events of this night would slow down the hands of time till all creation stopped. Time was not passing. It was stretching like a gigantic rubber band. It had ceased to exist. It was an illusion accomplished with mirrors and beveled gears, and the machinery had ceased to create that illusion. My thoughts were so many and so confused that they canceled each other. Every cell in my brain felt as though it were loaded with a different charge. The thing was becoming intolerable, and I knew Jerry was feeling something the same way. His face was set, and the gray of his eyes was darker than I had ever seen it. I knew he was intensely nervous by the way he kept sliding the palms of his hands back and forth against each other. And now it does a flash forward. "You remember the gesture he always had, Dad?" "Yes, I remember it." "He used to do it just before the kickoff when he was playing football, and when he got married, before the ceremony." I went on with my story, quickly. Prexy, though, was perfectly self-possessed. He must have been wondering if we were a couple of murderers. He must have been thinking about what all this would mean to the university, about the publicity and the crowds of curiosity seekers that would soon be littering the campus, about the difficulty of keeping his faculty and the student body quiet, and about 1,001 other things. But he was making his decisions as calmly as though the whole thing was mere routine, like the reading of minutes in a trustees' meeting. "I wish," he said finally, "that I could spare you two gentlemen something of what lies ahead of you in the next few hours. You can imagine the difficulties in which this places me." We assured him that we could. He went on. "The story you have told me is so extraordinary that I believe you are telling the truth. Whether this is a case of accident or murder, I cannot decide. Ultimately, the police will have to decide it. I must, therefore, telephone them at once and attend to certain other matters as well. I put you both on your honor as university men not to touch anything in this room until I return from the telephone downstairs." And without waiting for any reply, he went down the spiral steps and left us alone in the room. "I pledge my honor as a gentleman," said Jerry in a low voice, "that during the course of this examination I have neither given nor received assistance." It was the honor pledge we all used to write at the end of every exam paper. I laughed. "So far as he's concerned, we're still undergraduates." We could hear Prexy's full-throated voice booming in the hall below. He called the police, the dean's office, the infirmary, and several other places. After a while, we stopped listening to him. Perhaps some other sort of person would have been excited at being thrust willy-nilly into the midst of a disaster like the one of that night, but we could find no stimulus in the situation. We were tired. The game had drained us of emotion. The liquor had worn off, and the adventure was not a nice adventure. If I shut my eyes, I could still see Lenormand's body in its strange, horrible position, the great parasite of fire growing out of it, and the flicker of the eyes as we came into the room. It was frightening. The chill in that observatory chamber came from something colder than the night November air. It went in deeper than my bones. It went into my mind. "This is grim," Jerry observed. "Oh, I don't know," I said with what must have been a feeble effort at jocularity. "To me, this is all in the day's work. I take it in my stride." "Of course you do." His face was unsmiling. "Somehow I'm not quite so sure of it. I'm not quite so much of an Iron Man. I don't like it." When Jerry talked that way, it was no use trying to be flippant. I suspected that he saw something more in the situation than I did, and that he was alarmed about it. He told me what it was after a while. "Bark, listen." He lowered his voice. "This is a murder, all right. It's too incredible to think that it's an accident, or the result of heart failure, or anything like that. It's a cinch the autopsy will prove I'm right." "Admitted." He added nothing more, so I went on. "And it's a murder that we didn't commit, though. And it's a murder that we didn't commit, though I bet a lot of people are going to think we did." He shook his head. "I wonder. After all, we haven't any motive. None whatever. And neither of us has any Leopold or Loeb tendencies. And how did we commit it? No, I think the papers will shy clear of accusing us even indirectly." "It's the police that worry me, not the papers." "Don't fool yourself." He was positive. "The police won't be able to find a thing to implicate us because there isn't anything to find. In a way, I must have been one of the few friends Lenormand had over here. We're in for a nasty siege of questioning, but the police will start looking elsewhere pretty soon." "How do you figure that?" "Lenormand had some enemies, and we both know who they are." I examined my mind and drew a blank. I don't. He was impatient. "Don't be thick. How about all that correspondence I used to type? That row he had with Trimble and Forsman and Stanward and the rest of them? There's the motive. I'm sure of it." I looked at him in astonishment. "You mean you think those stargazers and atom busters would kill each other over the Einstein space-time theory? Nuts." Jerry didn't think it was impossible at all. He insisted that the matter was vital, fundamental, that I had no idea of the importance of Lenormand's theory, and that if he was proved right, it would reveal a lot of his esteemed contemporaries as scientific jackasses. They wouldn't lose their standing in their own little world without a fight. Jerry thought some of them might have been desperate enough to kill Lenormand. He pointed out how bitter the letters had been. To me, the whole idea was unthinkable, and I said so. I asked him if he had any single man in mind. No. Then, I told him, forget it. Don't, for God's sake, uncork that idea on the police. Next thing you know, they'll have Einstein down at headquarters, going over him with a rubber hose. And the poor guy came over here from Germany to get away from all that. He laughed. Okay. I wasn't going to tell him anything except what we saw anyway. If they find out about that old row, though, I might have to tell them the theory. And there is one thing that supports it. I saw that he really was serious. What's that? I asked skeptically. The fire. What about the fire? It must have been a chemical, maybe thermite or something of that sort. No ordinary substance would burn into flesh and bone as deep and fast as that did. If you get me, it must have been a scientist's kind of fire. I took a little time to digest that idea. It was plausible, but I simply couldn't believe that any of Lenormand's professional critics and antagonists would want to kill him. Most scientists, in spite of the movies, aren't murderous, mad geniuses at all. There were several other things that were against that theory. And if I'm right about that, Jerry continued, the autopsy ought to reveal what the stuff was. But what about the chair? I objected. I felt we weren't getting any place. He looked thoughtful. Lenormand must have been knocked out first. The stuff was put on him, and then he was set in the chair. The murderer must have touched it off as we came up the stairs. And then he put some more of it on his feet and evaporated himself, I suggested. Jerry pointed to the open slide in the observatory dome. He must have gone out that way. From his tone, it was plain that he wasn't satisfied with his own theory. Neither was I, but I had no alternative suggestion. We could think of nothing further to say. Each of us was trying to find a theory, however vague, to cover the facts and prove we were not the only ones to visit Lenormand in that cold, round room. After a moment, we heard Prexy coming upstairs again. As he entered, we stood up. It was astonishing how much he made us feel like undergraduates. "Sit down, gentlemen. You both must be pretty tired." Obediently, we sat. "I shall remain here with you until the police arrive, and then—" His face altered, but whether to tenderness or pity, or something subtler, I could not make out. "I shall have the melancholy duty of bringing the news of this tragedy to Mrs. Lenormand." "Mrs. Lenormand?" Jerry's exclamation was one of incredulity and shock. "Yes," said Prexy, half to himself. "Mrs. Lenormand. You didn't know he was married?" "No, and he never told me. I saw no announcement. I mean, this is absolutely a—" Jerry was floundering. "We were all surprised," Prexy admitted. "I don't believe anyone expected it. He wasn't the sort of man who gets married ordinarily." "For God's sake," I said, "when did it happen?" Prexy's expression as he looked at us was introspective. He must have been thinking fast with most of his mind and answering us with nothing but the top layer of it. "About 3 months ago, he appeared at one of Mrs. Murray's summer teas and simply presented her to all of us as his wife. It was quite a sensation." I could imagine that. The microcosm of university society must have been rocked to its center. Lenormand, of all people. Why, it actually amounted to bigamy. The man was so genuinely wedded to his work. He ate with it, lived with it, slept with it. Many a time Jerry had commented on the fact that Lenormand had utterly no use for women. He wouldn't even employ a secretary, which was one reason Jerry had done so much of his secretarial work for him. He certainly was old enough not to be swept off his feet and disciplined to the ascetic life he had chosen. I couldn't imagine what he wanted with a wife, and surprised as I was, I could see that Jerry was completely thunderstruck. He was staring at Prexy as though he expected to learn it was all a joke.
President Murray, he said finally, I wish you'd tell me more than that. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why did Lenormand... Prexy frowned. I've told you almost all that I or anyone else so far as I know can tell you. Not one person in the university has ever seen her before. Had ever seen her before. Lenormand was matter-of-fact about it, at least on the surface, but he's never given us a word of explanation. We couldn't pry anything out of him. We couldn't even... He checked himself. This is really all beside the point. Jerry was urgent. No, it isn't. If Lenormand got married, and I knew him well, sir, I was his friend, there is something strange about it. I can't think of a thing that would make him want to surrender his freedom. Why, even the most beautiful woman in the world... With no expression on his face at all, Prexy said slowly, Some people might say that she is the most beautiful woman in the world.
And that is where I will leave it for today. We will continue this next week with more of To Walk the Night. I have many more covers available, more than I thought there were, which is nice. I think that really does it. This week, we will continue at least through to the end of that story. I don't know if I'll go on to read The Edge of Running Water in this 2-story collection. I probably will. That's how I roll. Why wouldn't I? But we'll see. After we get those done, we'll move on to C.J. Cherry's Cytine, which will be quite a long read indeed. John Johnson, thanks for tuning in. Glad you enjoyed The Dark Forest. Hopefully enjoyed The Dark Forest. Let's see, anything else? Oh yeah, sorry about this Monday. I had work. National holidays, I generally have to work those for various reasons. Let's see. This Friday we will finish The Ascension Factor by Bill Ransom and Frank Herbert. After we do that, next week we will start The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson. So the people who've been looking forward to that can experience that, and everybody who hasn't experienced that will experience it. There will be experiences to be had. It's a good time. I've commented on how the prose is kind of brutally flowery and arcane, but the overall vibe of the beast is absolutely immaculate. I think that's how the young people put it nowadays. It is quite a vibe, and it is immaculate, and it is quite a tale. It'll be a while before we get to the meat of the beast, because it has a pretty long intro sequence that you kind of need to get through. It's very much I told you this story so I could tell you. I told you that story so I could tell you this one type affair. So be patient with it. It'll be at least the first installment, but then it is all systems go, and you'll get to grab your discos and adventure forth into the Nightland. But that's not for another week or two. Next Monday, I should be free, and we will... I didn't know until pretty late in the game that I wasn't going to be free this Monday, so I apologize for that. We will continue reading through Full Metal Panic Book 6, Dancing Very Merry Christmas, which is not season appropriate, but I don't care. It's the way it's gonna be. Sorry, gang. I'll try and get together... let me see, what does the schedule look like for Christmas-related stuff? December. Oh, it's on a Thursday. Dang and blast. So I don't have to worry about it this year. That's nice. I might still find time to do something seasonally appropriate, depending on if I'm between tales or not. Other than that, stay safe, stay sane, be toasty or cool as per your preferences, and be decent to each other. We will get to more of the Rim of Morning 2-story collection next week. All right. See you later. I did the spiel already. I don't need to do it again. That's nice.
We're gonna go.